Good morning, everyone, and we're going to have a discussion, and if we have a few moments, indulge in some questions with Paul. We're very privileged to have you, Paul, here, and I think we'll follow on from Neil's conversation about cybersecurity and really get into some questions about what is happening, what can we do about it, what do we need to know. Before we do that, a few words about yourself. How did you become KPMG's head of cybersecurity and a partner at KPMG?
By mistake, actually. So I had nearly 30 years' experience in defence, security and intelligence before being asked to join the partnership at KPMG, and I went there in order to stop running things. I was running something. I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to go and just see if I could make a difference by helping people myself rather than having an organisation do it for me. Like you have your huge office does everything for you, David. So I wanted to see if I could do it myself. So I went there, and within 6 months I couldn't keep my mouth shut about how they should be organising themselves. And they said, well, you do it then, and they put me in charge. So as simple as that. And
the type of work you're doing today, the type of clients that you're working with, the type of advice you give?
Cyber in the boardroom, that's my thing. So I advise the board risk committees at 3 large banks, biggest insurance company in the world, and the other famous bank, National Grid. So I do cyber in the boardroom, talking to boards about how they should approach this stuff. I try to help them ask the right questions. I try to help them understand where they sit with relation to other organisations. And I try and provide that sort of bridge between the technology people and the business people. Right. Make that understanding happen.
So that's a good starting point then for us to dive straight into what you think and how we might understand cybersecurity in the context of dynamic integrated systems.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of great talks today and insights into how systems are evolving, how AI and machine learning is coupling in to helping us gain insights about data in those systems. Maybe there are 3 areas we could talk about. Let's think about, first of all, the workplace and the stuff we need to do to keep our businesses going, and then we'll come on and think about how we live as individuals and families and groups of friends, and maybe even how we play. So let's think about these dynamic integrated systems. First of all, help us think through what you think is happening in work and cyber.
Well, I think actually, David, you can't separate those domains anymore.
Okay.
So the thing that links those domains is our own device. So these days we're increasingly being asked to bring our smartphones to work and use those for our work. Those smartphones are also what we use to summon your Tesla, which you were showing me earlier on, and also what we use to play games on and interact with our home networks. So there isn't that space anymore between work, home and play. So that's one thing, and I think people that feel that they can make those spaces exist are kidding themselves, because those domains are all linked now, whether it be through internet connections or through cloud access or through the Internet of Things. So I think what we're seeing now is these hugely diverse networks that include all sorts of stuff. I enjoyed that talk just now, by the way, looking to see how you can detect threats to network changes. Networks are changing all the time. It's hard to keep pace with those changes, and the stuff that's connected is of variable ages.
So, but who's responsible then?
Nobody's responsible.
Well, wait a minute. If we've got these, it sounds like we've got messy systems here.
Have.
And it sounds like the edges between when we go into an office and when we're sitting here or doing something else are completely blurred.
They're blurring, and the blurring is caused by the device you use. So the way that organisations try to protect themselves is to manage what goes on in that device. So you either compartmentalise the applications of that device, you whitelist them, you say only these apps can run, you talk about, you clean the traffic between the device and your network, you use a VPN to make sure that everything is encrypted, and you try as far as you possibly can to keep the contamination off your network that could come on through the telephone. The problem is that your network is also now connected to a building management system, like the one in here, that has probably some protocols in it that were designed during the 1970s. And one of the things that interested me a few weeks ago is to meet someone who had hacked a building management controller because he thought he should, just for fun, and by mistake had got into 7 million other devices that were also using the same protocol. If you remember those guys a few years ago who hacked the Jeep Cherokee through the Wi-Fi system, like we could hack your Tesla through the Wi-Fi system. The problem they had was not hacking the Jeep Cherokee, it was not hacking all the Jeep Cherokees, and in fact all the cars that connected to the Wi-Fi using the same wireless protocol. So when they developed their hack to get into that Jeep Cherokee, they found that every car within range that had the same wireless protocol had been hacked by them. And they had to spend the next 6 months narrowing it down to just that Jeep so they could do the demo.
So if I give you a lift in my car and you register your phone so that you can put something on the playlist, can you from there get back into my phone?
Could I? I couldn't do it, but I know people who could.
Right. So we won't go into the car and journey stuff very much more, but I think the point you're making here is that we've got risks that are now difficult to see, and the CIO in the office isn't just the person responsible for this.
Which is why businesses, when they're thinking about this stuff, have to think about what's critical to them. So you start with looking at what's critical business information, what your critical business processes are, and look for the crown jewels, and then work out how you protect those crown jewels and accept that you have a fuzzy, porous perimeter and that you can't stop everything. Okay. So I think that's why these days the issue is not stopping stuff getting in so much as how to deal with the events when they happen. So the buzz phrase of the moment is operational resilience.
So we'll come on to that in a minute. Before we do, just cover off on the key threats that might worry us most, and how do we recognise them? First of all, what are they? And how do we recognise them?
In buckets, I guess the first threat we would worry about is criminality. You used a number for crime in the UK. It's hundreds of billions worldwide now, and in fact this year cybercrime has overtaken drug crime as the most profitable criminal activity in the world. So it's just overtaken, which is, if you're into these league tables, cybercrime is now number one. So criminality, the first thing. Second thing, insiders, people in your own organisation who are either disgruntled or unhappy with you, who you feel they've been wronged, who have access, or indeed, overlapping with the first category, people from criminal gangs who've joined your organisation just to try and get access so they can help people come in. A crisp packet fact, 80% of all cyber events are caused by insiders, witting or unwitting. I mean, unwitting, clicking on that phishing email makes you an insider.
How do you sorry to pause you there, but how do you safeguard against the insider? How do you even know who might be an insider? So you have to do some things like network monitoring. So the description we've just heard about network monitoring, people like Darktrace are doing that already, looking at the anomalous events on networks, looking for anomalous traffic. And you use also your identity and access management system. So every organisation has something that says, who are you, where are you, what are you entitled to look at, what are you looking at the moment. And if you start looking at things that aren't part of your job, that should send up a flag in the organisation. And also these days, people with serious information and financial institutions are doing vetting of their employees and bringing in welfare and HR to say, is this person undergoing a life event that might make them a bit more unstable? Is this person experiencing financial difficulties? Do we need to take them off this sensitive post for a while and help them put back on? So Paul, presumably I work at Imperial College, which is a very open, porous organisation. Some of your companies have visitors, they have people seconded from the supply chain working with you, they have people in and out that you hook onto the Wi-Fi networks. I mean, they're not quite insiders, but they're inside the organisation for periods of time. How do you deal with that? Because we don't want to shut the door on all the collaborations that we need.
So again, back to the crown jewels and critical business processes. What is the most important information to you? Is it an algorithm? Is it a piece of intellectual property? Is it bank details? What is it? And make sure you protect those and you control the access to those important data. So it shouldn't be possible easily to get from the visitor Wi-Fi through to the latest piece of R&D you're doing that you don't want to get out. It shouldn't be possible to do that.
And what about the other two areas, the threats? You said to me earlier, hacktivists and states.
So I'll come to them. Hacktivists, they are people who would like to bring you down because they don't like what you're doing, they like to make political statements, they like to grandstand and show they can do things. Hey, we got in, look, we got into the Pentagon, or we got into government server. They like to do that.
BP, Shell, Airbus,
Shell, all those people. So my favourite hacktivist story, actually, just a quick one, 2012 Olympics, one of the sponsors was Lloyds Bank. And there was a group of hacktivists that wanted to get at Lloyds Bank because it's a big imperialist thing and supporting the Olympics. And so they hacked Lloyds, but they didn't hack Lloyds Bank, they hacked Lloyds the chemist, and they took Lloyds the chemist offline for a while. So they are a bit stupid sometimes, hackers.
Right. And states?
And states. So there's a lot of news and noise about state attacks at the moment. Obviously, some large countries try to steal intellectual property from other countries. Some states like to disrupt other countries' networks. So we heard about the attack on the Ukrainian power networks. There have been attacks on other national infrastructure, and you can see states flexing their muscles. Particularly, some of the states, Russia, China, and others. You can see them flexing their muscles and saying, let's see if we can disrupt bits of infrastructure just to practice doing it, and that does happen quite a bit. If you're a company, though, the likelihood of being a victim of state-sponsored attack is quite low, unless you're holding a piece of really valuable information or something that's really cutting edge that might give a material advantage. The rest of the time, you're probably not of interest.
Just before we go on, Paul, I want to ask you in a minute about timescales, because part of this morning is about the dynamics and are we seeing things speeding up. Before we do that, just on the criminal one again, which you said is now grown up to the top of the league table. I'm presuming that there are certain people in our organisations that are more vulnerable to criminal activity than others. And how is that playing out? How do we spot that?
So the sorts of things that criminals are doing drop into various categories. So one of the most common things criminals do is called CEO fraud, which is where they imitate someone in the Treasury Department or the Chief Executive or someone with the signing authority and say, please pay this supplier, here's the account number, off you go. It's very popular. It nets hundreds of millions of pounds quite frequently, and it goes back to back to the ancient Egyptians. The first example of CEO fraud I'm aware of was on a papyrus where someone pretended to be the pharaoh's representative to get paid for some goods that he hadn't delivered. So that's CEO fraud. That's going on now. The second thing that was still very popular, ransomware, sending out ransomware and getting you to install it and then getting you to pay to decrypt it. People will pay still to get decrypted. And the one I think that's most interesting at the moment is a big shift into taking control of computer networks and getting hold of your network and using the compute to mine Bitcoin or Ethereum. So, if you're, David, you chair the board at the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Agency, don't you?
I do.
You have a supercomputer, don't you?
We do.
So, hacking a supercomputer and get it to calculate Bitcoin would be a great criminal event.
And if they do it through my computer, I'm going to be in the Daily Mail. Yeah.
Yes, you will.
I might have to have some advice from you, Paul, on that one. Yeah. But I'm presuming, there are quite a number of people in executive roles here in the room. I'm presuming that one way of getting at you is to target you directly, but another way is through your PA or through someone who's helping you. And
we've heard about phishing already, but spear phishing is extremely hard to detect and hard to avoid. Spear phishing is when they do a little bit of research on you. They look at your LinkedIn profile, they might look at your Facebook page, they might find out something about your family, and they might come at you with an email that's specifically tailored to you, your interests, your life, and may even be linked to events in your life. And it's very, very hard to not click those. Also, criminals, they quite like to go via the executive assistant or the PA. Sometimes these people aren't as cautious as you might be, or they're a great way to get access to a number.
Well, they might be trying to be really helpful.
They might be trying to be really helpful. I mean, people ringing up and asking for advice. It's social engineering is a big part of this criminality. And one of the best ways of social engineering is to ring up and say, can you help me, please? We have a natural inclination to help people.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the threats. Are we seeing things speeding up because of the connectedness of these dynamic distributed networks?
Yes,
and what I mean, the title of today is Dynamic Technology for Real-Time Business. I'm always a bit cautious about what people mean by real-time. The latency even in the financial services, normally you can do something about it. But what do you think, Paul, is happening with timescales? What's our reaction time What's the signal to reaction?
So the timescale for threats materializing is getting shorter, and your ability to respond has to improve along with those. So we saw the WannaCry event. It spread like wildfire when that ransomware happened, due to the mechanisms used to spread the stuff. I mean, I was talking to a security operations center team a couple of weeks ago. They're a very good SOC team. They run a global SOC, and it works really well. They have a policy in this team of stopping to celebrate people's birthdays. And they just all turn around, they all get together, they have a cup of tea and a slice of cake, and they sing happy birthday. They don't do that anymore because a few months ago they did that, and they turned around and found they'd lost half the network due to a piece of ransomware that had landed and expanded while they were singing happy birthday to each other. So that sort of thing, the speed at which these things happen is an issue. And back to resilience I mentioned earlier on, the question is not stopping everything. The question is how much damage does it do and how fast do you recover?
Right. But you want some parts of the organisation to recognise things almost immediately if there's an anomaly.
Yeah.
And to do something. So let's get on to that. What do we do about this?
So,
and how quickly do we react?
Okay, so this is where we get help from the machines. So we heard the previous talk about the AI. One of the things that AI can do is spot things happening quite quickly, and then say, hang on, I don't understand that. I'm just going to segregate this bit of the network for a while, and then ring home and say, what's going on in this bit of the network? And we've trained them to do that, and they can be trained properly. That can work very fast. The other thing you can do is provide defense in depth across your network, so it gets harder and harder and harder to get into the places where bad stuff is stored. And the other thing that people do is segregate their network so that you can't move from one element to another. It's not possible to get past the segmentation.
If we're thinking about distributed systems, I mean, in my mind, perhaps in the old material world of systems, you would think of modularity, and you'd think of components that can plug and play, but that can be taken out without damaging the rest of the system if you need to replace them. Is that model something we can use here so that we can leave some of the security in the module rather than having to do the system scope on it?
So I think you design it in, and the problem with most of what we're looking at these days is it didn't have security designed in from the start, and we're having to bolt it on afterwards. So I think if you're designing something, whether it be an app or a digital platform, or a connected business, you design the security in from the word go and make sure that you're thinking about that. Helpfully this week we've had a European standard published on the basic standard for the Internet of Things security. That's a good start. We didn't have any of that before this week. That's a good place to look. And there's some basic advice, I give people. This is not rocket science. Patch.
Okay, so let's just think what patching means. How does that work for people? I mean, I think we all, when we get a little indicator that we should update our software, that really means the provider's providing us a patch, which...
Do it within days. I mean, don't leave it for weeks.
Right.
And when if you do patch your iPhone, your iPad, or whatever, at the time it does a reset and and a bit of a cleanup. So it's a good thing to do.
Right. Do criminals, when they see a patch come out, do they have any way of knowing whether you've used it or not?
Absolutely. Yes. And there are sites on the internet that list numerous organisations and their patching status, whether or not they've patched. So one of the ways in which criminals can gain access to you is to go to LinkedIn, for example, and look at the computer department of a particular organisation, and all the LinkedIn profiles say, I'm an expert in this, I'm an expert in that, I'm an expert in so-and-so. Apache Struts version 2.2, Windows XP. You think, hang on a minute, what's this company running? And all these people in the IT department are experts in obsolete operating systems and versions which went out of fashion 2 or 3 years ago. You then go to a different part of the web and you download all the vulnerabilities for those obsolete operating systems. Off you go. So that can be how it works. It has worked like that in the past in organisations.
I mean, in sort of general systems theory terms, you're as strong as your weakest link.
Yes.
And you mentioned at the beginning that we have legacy systems, we have technologies of different age. I mean, my TV is 10 years old, but it's connected to the internet, and I can't remember if I've ever patched it or uploaded anything to it, and I don't even know how to find that out.
Is it a Samsung?
No.
Oh.
But you're going to tell me something about what's wrong with Samsung?
Well, they had a voice I think it's been disabled now, but they had a voice-activated system on the Samsung TV a couple of years ago that was actually listening to you all the time.
Yeah.
And if it connected to the internet, it could listen to you all the time and and transmit your conversation through the internet.
I do remember having a little play with Connect when it came out from Microsoft, and had it sat there looking at us, and until my wife said, I'm not having that in the room, because if that's connected to the internet, watching TV every night, I'm not having it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's like Alexa, or the Google equivalent. That the device itself is hackable.
Yeah.
Once you've hacked the device itself, you've got control of the voice commands. So off you go.
But this is the problem, isn't it? How do we reset everything in our?
You can't.
No. Well,
So I think you have to live with the knowledge that you can't get perfect security, that compromise of some sort is inevitable, and it's back to the question of how much damage is done and how fast you recover.
So I was curious, and I read in the Financial Times, so it can't be fake news, that Mr. Putin is about to shut the internet in Russia for a day. What's that about?
Well, they're doing an experiment to see whether they can cut Russia off from the wider internet. They're going to bring the routers back onshore and try and see they cut. If they do that, it will cause a dramatic drop in functionality for the Russian internet while they do it. But they're doing an experiment to see if we needed to, could we, in emergency, cut ourselves off. It's a bit like an organisation saying we're going to do a cyber exercise, and as part of that exercise, we're going to simulate an event that's ransomware, let's say, and we're going to practice chopping off email for the whole organisation for 24 hours and see what happens. So they're going to do that.
I mean, it's an interesting question that the other week we had a VIP guest at White City, and someone had organised a full building evacuation halfway through this visit, and I won't say too much more about it other than that they didn't tell us until the last moment, and it was a bit embarrassing. But I understand the need to check whether a building can be evacuated properly, and you only do that physically when you've got normal things happening. Why don't we do that more with cyber practice?
Organisations that are on top of this stuff do.
Right.
So the organisations that I work with who are very good at this stuff, they practice all the time, and they practice all the way up to board level. They have events where they simulate cyber attacks, or they simulate data centre failures, or they simulate all sorts of things, and they work through their response. And if they're regulated organisations, regulators these days are requiring organisations to demonstrate how they respond and to show that they have fallback plans, and to show that customers or patients or whoever don't get affected by whatever's going to go on.
And I'm tempted, rather jokingly, to ask you, if we head for we haven't mentioned the B word, but I'm going to mention it, because it's nearly lunchtime. If we head for a no-deal Brexit, is that an opportunity for us to bring everything onshore and have a day like Russia when we take ourselves off the internet as well?
Why would we want to do that?
I wouldn't want to do it.
It would be crazy. I think that's not the way to go about protecting yourself. The way to go about protecting yourself is the sort of stuff the NCSC are doing, by educating, by uplifting our national preparedness and making sure that we're a safer place to do business. So it's like the idea, why should you try and attack the UK because it's got strong defences? I'll go to the next house down the street because it hasn't got a burglar alarm.
Good. Nice answer. Couple of minutes before we wrap up. Does anyone have a question about any of what you've just heard from Paul? And please say who you are.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Paul. I'm Jay Griffiths from AWE.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm good.
I have a question about encryption.
Yeah.
Thank you so much about encryption. How do you see the future of cryptography and cybersecurity?
So quantum is the thing that people talk about. So when quantum compute gets to be a thing, then all our ancient encryption will be exposable and crackable. I mean, homomorphic encryption now can help you with that. Quantum compute also brings with it quantum crypto. So I think it's a solution and a problem at the same time. But I think if you're thinking about modern forms of encryption like homomorphic, that you're preparing yourself for quantum if you do that.
And I think maybe as a tag for IBP and what we might do in future, we've already had events on quantum, but I'm sure previous events aren't the last word on the subject, and we would be delighted, I think, from Imperial to host, wider discussions on what's happening in this space. And Imperial's own capabilities are growing quite rapidly in this area, and it would be probably a very nice discussion for us to have in an IBP event. Any other points or questions? Yeah, say who you are if you don't mind.
Talking to Dark Trace,
Hmm.
Do you think we're starting to see the arms race for AI? If you don't have an AI defense, that you're quite vulnerable to AI?
I think we're at the beginning of that. So I think when they say AI attacks, I think they mean attacks that have been enabled by machine learning. So, AI is a broad church. So what we're starting to see is small changes to well-known malware that are made very rapidly by machines. Those small changes work very well against signature-based detection because their signature has changed. They don't work well against AI-based detection like Darktrace, and they don't work at all against systems that just don't allow attachments through that have got stuff in them like Glasswall. So, of course, as artificial intelligence arrives as a tool, it's going to be used by both sides, and why not? Of course it will be. The problem I can see, we get to the future, is we won't actually understand what's going on. Our defender will be opaque to us, as are the attackers.
We presumably need to make sure we're employing more Imperial College graduates who've got the knowledge of how to deal with AI in our organisations to understand that.
Well, as a graduate of Teesside Polytechnic, I might disagree with you on that one, David.
Very good. I'll take one last comment or question, if anyone has a burning issue, or if you're... Yeah, go on, Julie.
Julie McCann, Imperial College. GDPR.
Yep.
One of the interesting parts of that is that you as an organisation used to implement that has to be abreast of all the ways that you can be weak in that in terms of even research that's going on. How are you guys being taught that?
By trying to attend events like this, by talking to people in the industry, by speaking to each other all the time, by making sure that we look at what's happening and what the latest breaches and news are. So as stuff starts to happen, you have to try and be aware of it. What would the implications of that be? Luckily, we're still at the point where a new development does take a little while to actually make its way into the market. So we still have some time when we spot new developments. That time is getting shorter and shorter. So it's hard work, is the answer to your question.
Great. Paul, last question from me and we'll wrap up.
Yeah.
Do you sleep at night?
Yes, I do sleep at night because, you just have to think, well, this stuff's going to happen. It's inevitable. You just have to, get on with it. If you could become paralysed.
Yeah. So I think the message here, we've got to take this seriously. We can't expect someone else to be responsible because this is so interconnected. It's happening all the time. It's going to continue to happen. And we're all part of everyone else's networks these days, so we have to be seriously responsible. But we can sleep at night because we've got people like you advising our top institutions, and our top institutions are taking it seriously, and all the other ones need to as well. And we should still have fun.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Good. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
I think this concludes our morning, and thank you very much, all of our guests and IBP members, for being with us. Thank you, our speakers from Imperial. Thank you, Maria, Julia, and others for organising in what seems to be a lovely venue, actually. It's wonderful to be here. Lunch is downstairs, and thank you, and we'll see you over lunch.